Because of the economics of having large oxygen tanks aboard airliners simply doesn't work out, not to mention that the air quality inside the plane would rapidly become unpleasant if fresh air wasn't constantly supplied regardless of the oxygen levels, commercial airplanes have a very clever system installed to solve the problem of ultra-low pressure atmosphere at cruising altitudes. In most modern airliners, the Boeing 787 Dreamliner notwithstanding, outside air is bled off from the compressor stage of the turbine engines and eventually piped into the passenger areas. However, a bit of processing is needed first, as the compressed air is extremely hot, on the order of nearly 400 degrees Fahrenheit or 200 degrees Celsius at this stage. Thus, before it enters the passenger compartment, it is first allowed to expand and is run through a heat exchanger and air cycle system to cool it off sufficiently. This system can also work as a heater, with some of the hot air mixed in with the cooled air to regulate cabin temperature. Once cooled and filtered, the pressurized air, which now has sufficient oxygen density to keep people happily conscious, is piped into the cabin area, usually at levels around 12 psi, about equivalent to atmospheric pressure at 7,000 feet. So why 12 psi instead of something like the standard sea level pressure of about 14.7 psi? Well, 12 psi is sufficient for the majority of passengers, while simultaneously reducing the structural strain on the aircraft itself over something like sea level atmospheric pressure. As for the air already in the cabin, this is vented out through an outflow valve or multiple valves in larger aircraft, usually located near the rear of the plane. And a fun fact here, before smoking was banned on commercial aircraft, the area around this outflow valve was generally stained dark brown from tobacco smoke. The outflow valve opens and closes automatically to maintain a steady pressure inside the cabin, while the entire system is ensuring that fresh air is constantly being piped in and eventually blown out of the aircraft. In fact, while many complain of aircraft seeming stuffy, this system ensures that all the air in the aircraft is being completely replaced on average every 2 to 3 minutes. Yes, that means that your car, house, or office is likely significantly more stuffy than a commercial airplane flying at 35,000 feet. And just to note here that the Boeing 787 Dreamliner handles cabin pressurization a little differently, using a modernized version of the electronic compressor system seen on many older aircraft. Unfortunately, sometimes planes lose cabin pressure. Whatever the cause, the loss of pressure, usually set at atmospheric pressures past 14,000 feet, will result in oxygen masks deploying. From here, useful consciousness may only last as little as 5 to 15 seconds, depending on remaining cabin pressure, which is why it's critical to immediately put your mask on rather than helping someone else first. You see, you can help them much better when you're not unconscious or dead. So, how do these airline oxygen masks actually work? Well, it turns out the economics of having a centralized oxygen tank to provide even emergency oxygen for passengers likewise simply doesn't add up. Similarly, having tiny individual pressurized oxygen tanks also isn't feasible. In fact, these masks aren't hooked up to any kind of tank or airline at all. So, well, that brings us to the question, how are you able to breathe oxygen through them then? Well, unsurprisingly, the answer is science. While designs can vary, in general, when you pull on the device to place it over your face, the tug on the mask's lanyard system releases a spring-loaded mechanism that sets off a small explosive charge. The resulting spark triggers a mixture of lead styphnate and tetrazine to generate heat, which will eventually cause a chemical reaction that produces oxygen for your mask. This is why they tell you to tug on the mask to get the oxygen flowing. You've got to set off that explosive charge to get the whole thing going. That's right, what you breathe through the mask didn't begin as pure oxygen. Rather, the plane is equipped with numerous small chemical oxygen generators, also known as oxygen candles, which are about the size of a small package of tennis balls, which contain a mixture of mostly sodium chlorate, NaClO3, less than 5% barium peroxide, BaO2, and less than 1% potassium perchlorate, KClO4. When these chemicals are heated by the lead styphnate and tetrazine, each undergoes a reaction that ultimately results in a fair bit of filtered, life-sustaining oxygen running through the tube to you. Of course, you might also smell a faint burning odor, but this is nothing to be alarmed about. It just assures you that the system is working. In fact, if the plane is actually on fire, the masks usually won't deploy, so as to not make the fire worse with the extra oxygen. So this brings us to the question of why the plastic bag on the breathing apparatus won't necessarily inflate as you're using the device. More than just cosmetic, the bags serve as something of a reservoir for oxygen. If you aren't taking a breath at all and have a good seal with the mask tight against your face, the bag keeps the precious, continuously flowing oxygen from escaping into the thin air around you, enabling more of the collected oxygen to be taken in with you when you do take a breath. When this is happening, or if you are breathing without the valves on the mask releasing much of the air used, the bag may begin to inflate as oxygen collects. When you breathe in, it will deflate. So why won't it always inflate at least a little to show that it's working? To begin with, you may not have a great seal with the mask on your face, particularly if you have facial hair. This will allow any produced oxygen and air you exhale to more readily escape. As long as the mask is reasonably secure on your face, this should still provide you with sufficient oxygen to get by on as long as the plane isn't flying above 40,000 feet and the pilot does his or her job and gets the plane below 10,000 feet as rapidly as safely possible. And if you'd like to see the procedures generally used by commercial pilots for this, go check out Mentor Pilot's recent video, Emergency Descend Cockpit Video. Even if you have a good seal, however, the rate at which the oxygen is generated is generally not enough to fully inflate the mask's bag before you take deep, potentially panicky breaths, deflating it. This is simply because the oxygen generation isn't on demand, for the passengers anyway, but simply a continuous flow production of oxygen. Despite the potentially slow production, the chemical oxygen generators do provide oxygen at a sufficient rate to sustain passengers, generally designed that the peak oxygen production occurs right away when the plane may be at a very high altitude, with the oxygen production rates tailing off over the course of approximately 12 to 20 minutes before the system burns itself out. This should be long enough for pilots to get the plane low enough so that the air pressure is high enough for relatively normal atmospheric breathing. And if you've ever been unlucky enough to be in this sort of situation, you know that pilots can get the plane from altitudes like 35,000 feet plus to safe atmospheric levels in a surprisingly small amount of time in an emergency. And let's get into those bonus facts. As a result of the way the system works for pressurizing the airplane cabin and keeping a steady supply of fresh air, the humidity levels are ultra low, making it so that you dehydrate very quickly on flights. Particularly for long flights, it's crucial that you drink plenty of fluids. This ultra low humidity level, combined with the low cabin pressure, also reduces your sense of taste and smell by about 30%, which is why airline food generally tastes so bland. To try and compensate for this somewhat, many airlines make sure their food is much more strongly flavored or spiced than food that you'd normally find appetizing. And now for another bonus fact. For a fun fact about breathing in general, which you might have never noticed before, is that the vast majority of humans breathe out of only one nostril at a time, with it switching periodically. The first known instance of someone studying this nasal cycle was German nose specialist Richard Kaiser in 1895. How your nose accomplishes this switch is via erectile tissue in your nose, which is very similar to the erectile tissue in a penis or clitoris. Erectile tissue will swell up in one nostril, mostly blocking it, and at the same time, erectile tissue in the other nostril will shrink, opening it up for breathing. Even more interesting is that depending on which nostril you are predominantly breathing out of at any given moment, it seems to greatly affect your body and your brain. For instance, a study in 1988 showed that breathing through your right nostril significantly increases blood glucose levels, while breathing through your left has the opposite effect. Another study in 1993 showed that when you are breathing through your right nostril, you will use significantly more oxygen than when breathing through your left. Most interestingly of all, yet another study published in 1994 showed that when you are breathing through your left nostril, your right hemisphere of your brain will be more active or dominant, and vice versa when you're breathing through your right nostril. And now, if you're wondering, even though the switching happens naturally in a cyclical fashion, you can affect it in more ways than just plugging one nostril or the other to force breathing through the one you want. If you lay down on one side or the other, after around 12 to 15 minutes, the erectile tissue in the nostril on that side will begin to swell up, and the other side will decrease its swelling, so that if you are lying on your left side, then your right nostril will open up and your left nostril will close up. It is speculated that when you sleep on your side, this nasal cycle could contribute to people naturally switching sides throughout the night at very regular intervals, even if they weren't in the slightest bit uncomfortable.